So they're doing a reboot of Heathers, very controversial. I've seen the original and I watched the first episode of the reboot. I want to give my thoughts on some of the differences, the similarities, because there are a lot of similarities. People saying that it's not true to the original spirit of Heathers. I think it's wrong. Now, one of the major themes of the original movie was a critique and satire of the grieving process and how when someone dies, oftentimes we focus on things that shouldn't matter, like the popularity of the person. It's a greater tragedy if they're popular when really that shouldn't matter at all, or how we overanalyze and look for an answer. We look at rather irrelevant facts about their life or things they said, and we try to parse this kind of meaning from them that isn't there. How some people take the tragedy and try to make it all about them. How we're so quick to blame society rather than the people directly involved in the tragedy. It's much easier to blame this kind of nameless, faceless enemy of society rather than actual flesh and blood people. And you could say that broadly speaking, it was a critique of activism in general and petitions, and I think that the new Heathers, the reboot, definitely falls in that vein as well. Now, what is the tragedy? I think it's very important that it's specifically suicide. And I think one of the differences is when the original Heathers came out, it was Generation X. It was a spirit, a zeitgeist that suicide had a lot more resonance and cachet than it does now. In some ways, nowadays, suicide's more prevalent, but suicide's seen largely as a response to bullying. It's seen as kind of a tragedy. It's something that people are driven to. Back in 80s, 90s, Generation X, suicide had this kind of mystique, and there was a sense of nihilism, the sense of the universe is meaningless, and suicide was seen not as this end result of being bullied to the point of desperation, but suicide was almost seen as enlightened and kind of a noble, principled response to a cruel, meaningless universe and a superficial, hypocritical society. And if you look at the 60s, the 70s, the rebels, it was a little more positive, a little more idealistic, changed the world, Woodstock. Once you got to the 80s, became a little darker, a bit more of an edge. So I think that's why Heathers resonated so much, because it was kind of tapping into that. And the generational conflict we see in the original Heathers, it was baby boomers against this new Generation X, nihilism, nothing matters. Now, in this reboot, the generational conflicts is the adults against these entitled millennials with their activism and their silly beliefs. So it's a very different dynamic. So we have the generational conflict that exists, but again, just with the spirit of the times changing, I think the generational conflict is very different. And I feel like in the original movie, the Heathers, they were evil and they were bad, but they were seen as kind of a reflection and the epitome of this superficial society that was very toxic that we lived in. And the critique was not just on the Heathers, but on society more general. In this new one, the Heathers, it seems like society and the ordinary people, they've enabled them, they've created them in some sense by telling them they're awesome, and now they're enabling them by not standing up to them. But it seems like it's more of a personalized evil. Like they're these kind of villains that have too much power and they're taking control and everyone's kind of scared of them. And it's very different than the original Heathers, where I feel like it wasn't really the Heathers that were this singular evil. It was more just society general, and it was a critique on the universe, society, rather than just a personalized villain. And in the original, Veronica had a lot of angst and a lot of anger at the world in general, wanted to see the world burn to an extent, and you got very similar vibes to Fight Club, actually. Now, Fight Club, there's this kind of sense of nihilism and this linking up with this alter ego to kind of take down the system, and very, very similar to Winona Ryder, Veronica's showdown with JD, very similar to the end of Fight Club, I found. In this new one, it's much more just a normal, decent girl kind of being appalled by these horrible bullies, these Heathers, and wanting to stand up to them. Very different than this generalized angst and desire for destruction.